Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.
You're listening to the Detroit is Different podcast on the Detroit is Different podcast network.
All right, we are back in full effect in the Detroit is Different podcast studios, and this time around I have somebody that has been upon request from a couple different people about, really, for a conversation like this, you need to talk to this guy. He knows a lot of stuff, and I just know some of the snapshots in the story. So it's like, I know some of the snapshots that you hear from like the street black folk that's like, oh, well, you know, Coleman was... And then, you know, some of the corporate people like, well, you know, one of the people that really helped with a lot of the development. And then I met him and I was like, oh man, this is like somebody I guess I should have known for forever. Because he was like, yeah, when you want to do it. You want to do it tomorrow? I was like, okay, I don't know about tomorrow, but definitely soon. Charlie Beckham, how are you today?
Hey, Kyrie, I'm doing just fine, man. I'm glad to be here. Glad we finally connected.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And in the final connection, and this is definitely a question that you're preparing for a one-man show, so some of this is going to be revealed in that, and I'm sure it'll have, like, pictures, and it'll have cues.
No question.
It'll be like that Mike Tyson one-man show.
There you go. Well, that's where I got the inspiration to do it. It wasn't my idea. When I decided I was going to do my book and my memoirs, I finally got around to it, and while I was debating that in my mind, I happened to catch on YouTube, which is something rare for me because I don't usually go on YouTube, but I saw Mike Tyson's one-man autobiography show on Broadway, which he did about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And he did a fantastic job. And I said, well, hell, if Mike Tyson can do it, I can, and that's a great idea.
Yes.
So that's where I got the idea from, to tell the story rather than to just write about it. And nobody's really done that here in Detroit. All my good friends who have retired have written outstanding books. And I said, well, I want to do something different. So that's where I got the idea from. So we're rehearsing right now. So you're right. This is perfect timing.
Well, thank you. And I definitely, I don't expect you to be talking about street fights with Trevor Broderick.
Yeah. That's right. And biting off people's ears. You know?
That will not be. But it will definitely be full of a lot of things, starting with this question right here.
Yes, sir.
Where you were like, it all starts, your family in Detroit.
Yes.
How did your family get to Detroit?
Well, you know, we, and a lot of people don't know this, and of course they'll learn it when we do the memoirs, but I was born and raised in the early years in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Get out of here.
Absolutely. My mom, born and raised there. My dad was born in Georgia, but migrated to Cincinnati, coming north, and met my mother way back in the early 1900s, of course. But I was born there, born in the projects, Lahr Homes, down on the west end of downtown Cincinnati. And what brought us here, my dad was a union organizer in Cincinnati, worked at the GM Norwood Assembly Plant there in Ohio, worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, got into the union, and was doing such a good job, he caught the eye of the then president of UAW, Walter Reuther, here in Detroit. And Walter Reuther offered him a job, said, I want you to come up and be my administrative assistant, which made him the first African-American to do that. And so he took the job, much to the chagrin of most of us in the family, but he dragged us along anyway. So in 1958, actually he came in 57 and commuted. 1958, we moved here to Detroit as a family, moved into Russell Woods neighborhood.
Okay, now a lot of different connections even to my family, as my dad's from Cincinnati.
What? Is that right?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Avondale community.
Avondale, there you go. I went to South Avondale Elementary School.
Oh yeah. You were probably knuckling up every other day.
I did not know that. That is funny.
And I have a lot of family down there. They don't think their country is all get up. It's like Cincinnati
There's
people.
no question. I said that during rehearsal
Northern
yesterday.
Kentucky.
I said this was just a small southern town. They don't want to admit that, but Cincinnati is a small southern town. We just across the river from the south.
You don't think that?
Absolutely. But a great town. I loved it. Still go back. We don't have as many relatives there as we used to, but that was our home base for a long time.
Okay.
And my mom would still consider it her home. That's where her family was and stayed there, and her mother and father. But we consider, since we've been in Detroit now for 60 years, we can consider this home too.
Now making that transition as a kid, because certain things stick out as a kid a whole lot more. And me knowing a little bit about Cincinnati through my dad.
Yes.
A lot of Germans, some Russians, like a different group of I guess I would say European immigrants settled in Cincinnati.
No question.
Which had a different impact on like the lay of politics.
That's right.
The lay of infrastructure.
Yes, sir.
The lay of a lot of things. So let's talk a little. Cincinnati is different before Detroit is different. What was it like? What were some of the struggles your dad was facing? Because even to this day, the infrastructures there are a lot different, kind of, because it's from a different part of Europe and how they see leadership.
Well, that's right, and you're right, and you mentioned that. I mean, a lot of Germans. It was a very conservative town, and quite frankly, still is.
Yes.
And was segregated like most cities up north back then. I talked about the Lower Homes, which is where we were born. That was our projects, but we were segregated, and that was down at the west end of Cincinnati. Avondale, as you know, was a Jewish community before they let us out of the Lower Homes and out of downtown. Central Avenue, the West End, they called it. Always a very conservative town, somewhat segregated. My dad saw that and found that. The advantage, though, when you find the difference between there and Detroit, Kerry, is that it's a small town. When I say small, I mean it's probably still only 400,000 or 500,000 in population. So the segregation was in smaller pockets around the city, but it was there. You started going north in Cincinnati. Black folks didn't do that much in the early 1900s, 1920s. We weren't welcome up there. Yeah. And it wasn't until the 40s and 50s when we were welcomed into the Avondale neighborhoods. And then, if you recall, Avondale was the black neighborhood. I mean, here in Detroit, we everywhere. Yeah. Whereas in Cincinnati, that was it, man. I mean, if you went too far east, out near the Lucan Airfield and the Air Force Base out there, or too far west, there wasn't a lot of folks that looked like us. So we were downtown, the west end of downtown, and then we started migrating out to Avondale, and that was it. And so when I first went to South Avondale Elementary School, it was probably half and half, black and white, and I'm talking in the late 40s, early 50s. So it's an interesting town. It has, because it's small, has continued to keep its conservative nature to it. Chief Craig was the police chief in Cincinnati at one time. Yeah. My very good friend Saul Green was the police monitor down there for the federal government for a number of years. And he told me about a lot of things. And we're talking about just 5-6 years ago, some of the problems that they still have with the racial issues with the police department in Cincinnati. So unfortunately, it's still a conservative, kind of slow-moving town, much different than Detroit, no question.
So let's talk about that transition. When you came here, because like even that sets up structures in schools differently, did they look at you like, what's this country kid doing in my class right now? Like, what was that like coming to Detroit?
No question. Certainly was a shock to us in the family as we came up. When we came, I was still in elementary school. My oldest sister had graduated and was about to get married. My brother, Bill Beckham Jr., which everybody knows around this town, was just in his senior year. So he came and finished his senior year here, and my other sister was a sophomore, so they both were at Cass Tech. But it was a culture shock for us. Detroit, of course, is a much bigger town. But quite frankly, Detroit's a country town too, man. Yes, it's just bigger.
It's a lot of that here.
Now when we got here, Detroit was probably 35-40% African American, so it wasn't even 50% black at that time. When we moved here into Russell Woods, and I tell this in my story, Russell Woods was a predominantly Jewish community. Matter of fact, we were in '58, we were the first or the second black family to move on our block. Wow. One of the first to move into Russell Woods, and that was in 1958.
What block?
On Sturtevant between Dexter and Homer.
Oh, man.
Right around the corner here.
Okay.
But that was in 1958. By 1960, Russell Woods was 100% black.
Ain't that something?
Jewish folks got up out of there quick as they could. And it's not like they were running from what they thought to be underprivileged, lower socioeconomic black folks. This was a middle-class black neighborhood. I brag about the families and the people that were in Russell Woods at that time. You know, my dad in the Union, Nick Hood, and the Hood family grew up around the corner. The Stinson family, Superior Building Barber Supply, Mel Jefferson down the street, Wallace Kirk, North Carolina Mutual. We had doctors, lawyers, attorneys, everybody from there. Warren Evans grew up not around the corner from here, and we played Little League Baseball together. Saul Green, Foots Green of Michigan Barber School, Lou Reed Thompson that owned Toll House Cleaners, had several cleaners around. I mean, these were successful, established, middle-class black folk. But the Jewish community, you know, that's when they moved from there and continued that migration northwest, ended up in the 6 mile, 7 mile Wyoming, Schaefer area over there. That's what turned Mumford into the Jewish high school that it was.
Okay.
And so we had, as a result, a good life in Russell Woods. I enjoyed it with Russell Woods Park, the Russell Woods Jazz Festivals, which they still have today.
Yep. The 19th is coming up.
Yes.
Even though I'm probably gonna post this after that. My dad's already asked me. He was like, "Can you do some pictures and stuff for that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be in effect."
Just a great neighborhood and a good place for us to grow up as young black kids, looking at other successful middle class black folks. And so we didn't know anything different. Folks like myself and Saul Green and Ron Thompson and, like I said, Warren Evans and Nick Hood Jr. and a whole bunch of other folks, that's what we knew and that's what we saw every day, were successful African Americans, you know, living and playing and working there.
Wow.
And so it was great. I loved it. And so it didn't take long for us to kind of forget about getting back to Cincinnati.
Okay.
Detroit became home.
Okay.
And my dad, as I say, was there at the UAW working for Walter Reuther, one of the first black administrative assistants to him, and then served 2 UAW presidents after that, Leonard Woodcock and Doug Frazier.
All right, now we're talking a little bit about that neighborhood, because I'm always enamored when I hear these stories of back in the day about Dexter Boulevard.
Yes.
And just the stories I hear from my late godmother and others, but particularly her and Orthea Barnes used to say, "Yeah, it was jazz clubs all up and down Dexter. It was this bowling alley."
Yeah, that's right, the Bowladrome on the corner of Leslie and Dexter. Matter of fact, I forget his last name, but Grover, a good friend of mine, Vince Davis's dad, owned that. One of the part owners in that. There was a bar, and I can't remember the name of it, that was in the corner of the bowling alley. That was famous. That was right on the corner of Dexter and Leslie, right across the street from the Esquire Grill.
Yes.
Everybody remember the Esquire Grill, which was across the street on Dexter
Yep.
and Leslie.
Yep.
The Minor Key, which was a jazz club a little further down on Dexter and Calvert. We had supermarkets, stores, dry cleaners, all up and down Dexter. At the corner of Dexter and Davidson was the Dexter Davidson Market. Now, that was Jewish owned when we first got there, of course. When they left the store there, but they were still there and still owners. And when they moved to Oak Park, if you'll notice, there's a Dexter Davison Market on Coolidge and 9 Mile. That's the same place.
Ain't that something?
They just moved it.
I never knew that.
But it was an outstanding market there. So that was a thriving commercial neighborhood there between Davison. If you went all the way down to Joy Road on Dexter, it was just outstanding. I remember standing on the corner of Dexter and Sturtevant in 1967, and we watched all of that burn during the rebellion. And so now we're in the process, and I'm proud to say that the city has now targeted Russell Woods and the Dexter Davison area as one of our revitalization neighborhoods. And so we're going to try to bring that area back by building up that commercial strip. And as you know, we've got people now moving back into Russell Woods, people buying some of those homes, people rehabbing those houses. And hopefully we can get back to the Russell Woods of old.
Well, when we left this Rosa Parks neighborhood, or Focus Hope neighborhood, that's, for me, because with my age,
that's right.
We moved over there off Leslie between Pasadena, well, not Pasadena, between, Patowski and Broad Street.
Patowski and Broad Street, yes, sir. That's the long block. That's right.
And just in that time, my sister bought a house on Fullerton. And when she bought the house on Fullerton, maybe in 2014.
Okay.
Sold it last year. in 17. And it was on the market maybe 2 days or something. So it was sold like that.
Yeah.
So I definitely know it's a lot more interest. But
no
definitely in that time of me growing up, kind of sort of in that area, I was like, man, Dexter is. I was like the one place. I was like, it's had some rough patches because the only McDonald's I've ever seen closed was on that. Now I don't know if it had the right traffic for the intersection and everything.
But it's rough up there. That commercial strip. I mean, between Davison and Joy Road, I mean, it's pretty bad now. There's no question about it. So we got nowhere to go but up.
Yeah.
But it's got potential, and so we're going to put millions of dollars in there and redevelop that whole area.
I can believe that.
It's coming.
And my favorite car wash from back in the day was over there.
On Elmhurst, Dexter Elmhurst. That's right.
So, and just a lot of different things. High school. What high school did you go to?
I went to Cass.
Okay.
The neighborhood high school was Central. But I figured I'd take the test and see if I could go to Cass because I knew even then that I wanted to be an automotive engineer. And so a lot of people don't know. I mean, I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. And I always wanted to be an automotive engineer. And so I knew I could get the correct kinds of classes at Cass. I couldn't get at Central. So I took the test and managed to get in. And so in 1962, I went down to Cass and graduated in the class of 65.
Ain't that something?
Yeah.
So you went through, you sped through high school.
Did my 10th, 11th, 12th grade, did it and got out of there.
I got you.
I went on to University of Michigan after that.
Okay. Now, what was Cass Tech like in the 60s, early 60s?
Well, we talk about that in the play too. That was my first taste of politics, quite frankly, when I was there at Cass Tech. The black folks were not a majority then. It was still a majority white school, and of course the advantage and what we liked about Cass is that it drew from all over the city. So the advantage we had is that you had friends that lived everywhere. So I knew people that lived over on Mack and East Grand Boulevard and down on the Lower East Side, but also on the West Side in the McKenzie area, etc. And so no matter where you went on the weekends to a party. You knew somebody and somebody knew you, and that was a real advantage. And so that was a big advantage down the Cass. But it was a great experience. It was at that time one of the best high schools in the country. You got an unbelievable education there. It still stands out in my mind that the chemistry book and the math book that I had in my senior year at Cass, when I got to the University of Michigan my freshman year, we were using the same book.
Ain't that something?
That's how strong that curriculum was back then. And so it was a school we were proud to be of. As I got my first taste of politics, I ran for class president in 1965 and put my little campaign team together. And we were hitting the study halls and going up and down the floors. And we did the whole mock election piece. And we counted the votes. And it was a large senior class, had about 1,000 people. And I probably didn't politic quite the same way I should have, so I lost by 25 votes. Now, we always felt we kind of got hooked in that because when they were in the room counting the votes, every candidate had 2 people from their staff counting, and they only allowed me to have 1. And so my campaign manager came out and said, Charlie, I can't keep up with the votes. They're going too fast. Everybody else has got 2 people counting. So I went to the assistant principal at that time, Mr. Kendall, who was not one of the assistant principals known to really like black folks that much. And he looked at me and said, "No, you got what you got. This is what we're doing." And so I don't know whether we got hooked or not. What I know is everybody else had 2 people in checking the votes, and I only had 1. We lost by 25 votes. Everybody was a little upset. They wanted to go shut the school down, and Ryan said, "No, we're not going to do that." We went and congratulated the winner. And what happened was, there's the science and arts curriculum at Cass. I was in Chem Bio, but the science and arts curriculum was where all the brainiacs and the smart folk were. And they swept the whole ticket. And I didn't campaign in the science and arts study hall. And so that was probably one of the mistakes that I made. And so they swept all the offices, and we congratulated them, and we moved on. But that was my first taste of Detroit politics. Was at Cass Tech.
Now, let's talk a little bit about just the other culture of it in classic Detroit culture.
Yes.
I graduated from Northwestern. So, and actually the president of Northwestern alumni. So all those 60s Northwestern alumni is always talking about what the old and old was like.
Yeah, man.
The original
and they still get together.
Yeah, talk about it. Talk about it. Every first Saturday, join us at Northwestern.
There you go.
10 a.m. So talking about that, I just know what the bus ride was like for me.
Yes.
If I chose to take the bus, what bus were you taking from Cass? Was it the Dexter?
Well, you know,
or
it's funny.
what
I
was
took
that?
the Dexter bus, so I went right by Northwestern every morning and then
yeah.
every afternoon. But, you know, the Dexter bus came right by. Matter of fact, the bus stop was right there at Sturtevant and Dexter. And I'd catch that. And, of course, you know, it would go down Dexter all the way to the Boulevard and Grand River, make the left turn at the school.
Okay.
All the way down to Cass Avenue and then down Cass.
So that's been the route for a minute.
Oh, ain't no question. I caught the 718 every morning. Now, back then, the buses ran on time and like clockwork. So I caught the 718 every morning. If you missed that, the 730 was coming right behind it. You could catch that and still get to the 8 o'clock class on time.
Yeah, because the Cass kids used to always be like, the Northwestern kids.
That's right. That's right. We rode right by there every day, man. And the other piece is that, you know, we rode by Motown. Every morning, and of course, you know, we kind of took it for granted then, but you know, it was not unusual for you to ride by there and see a Temptation or Miracles or Supremes down the road, somebody stand out on the lawn, everybody clowning around, Smokey Robinson. But we took that for granted, but we passed that every day and saw that going on there at Motown, Hitsville, USA.
It's like there go Marvin Gaye.
There you go.
I'm trying to get this girl's phone number.
That's right.
I could care less about
talk
Marvin
about
Gaye.
you later.
What is your number?
But yeah, the old Dexter bus, man, which still runs and is still there, and,
the 16.
we're getting that to the point where we're much more timely, and the buses are cleaner and the buses are running more regular now. So that's part of our resurgence. But yeah, rode that bus every day, man, for 3 years.
And the Dexter could take you a lot of places too.
Oh man, yeah, because you know, once it went, if you were going the other direction, I mean, it went all up to, you know, past Clemens, past this area over here. And you could take it all the way to UAD.
Okay, and the programming when you were a kid, what were some of the things you guys were doing as you talk about UAD? Because I've heard about like some of the summer programming at UAD if you were a kid, and then I've been hearing more about like Northwest Activity Center used to have like all this stuff for kids. Like, what were you doing when you were a kid with the summertime?
Well, in the summers, most of the time we were there in Russell Woods. My dad was the president of Russell Woods Association for 15 years.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, there's still a few families, Miss Norton and a couple others that are still there when my dad was president, because we're talking about back in the 60s. But he didn't like us playing a lot in the streets. He didn't think that we should be playing in the streets. His thing is, you got a big park down there, so take your behinds down to the park and
which
play.
Which made playing in the street even
well,
more
that's right,
tempting.
because he said, don't do it, you know. Go down to the Mercury and make a left turn, and when you hit you know, that kind of thing, playing touch football. So we didn't do much in the streets, but we played in the park, and we played a lot of basketball. And you heard me mention Saul Green earlier, who was my best friend, and he lived on Oakman between Santa Rosa and Monica. And his dad, Foots Green, was into sports all the time. Matter of fact, was on the early sports commission and those kinds of activities in Detroit long time ago. And so he built a basketball court on their side because they had a double lot.
Oh,
and so,
man,
that was every day, all day.
Was that like
where we played?
Was that like I always use this analogy, like, because I remember playing basketball so much too. It's like, you know, you play in other people's backyard and they like keep changing out of bounds, and it's like, hey man.
Yeah, yesterday that was inbound. How's the car out of bounds today? You know, because you know, bouncing the ball off of the house, that was in. That wasn't out. That you still played it off the house. But we played for hours, man. Shirts versus skins.
Wow.
And usually 3-on-3. And we played a lot. And you'd be surprised at some of the guys that grew up that came out of that backyard that ended up being some pretty star players after that. I mean, it was serious basketball because the word was spread after a while. So everybody wanted to come over
to that court
and play in the greens court.
Oh,
so we played there. Listen,
and you were from Cass, so you may have brought people from the other side of town to come over there.
Absolutely. And Mr. Green didn't play. I mean, you could come and play, but you had to behave yourself. I mean, there wasn't any cursing, loud talking, no drinking, no knives and guns, that kind of stuff. You come to play basketball, and because of the way he did it, everybody respected that. And so it was the place to come, and there was no messing around. And We did that for a lot of years, and it was a great experience. And the Green Boys could play. Saul and his brother Forrest, they played for McKenzie.
Okay.
They
kind of had home court advantage, though.
Yeah, well, no question about that. And their younger brother Daryl, who has passed away now, was just an absolute phenom. He ended up going to Assumption over in Windsor, but he scored 62 points in a game one day. I mean, this boy could do it. And so he was the little kid growing up, but he learned how to play ball in that side yard on those courts.
Now it sometimes ends up being like that, because it's like if you're young and you play against good older players,
that's right.
You end up like cutting your teeth.
Yeah.
Where like you really can ball, and then you start playing with people your age, and it's like I'm killing them. Killing them. Now being from Cincinnati.
Yes.
And I generally ask like the Detroit questions. Like when I had Attorney Reed here, he was talking about his brother and stuff, and I was like asking Kurt Jones questions for him. But Oscar Robinson, and I hear these stories of Oscar Robinson.
Yeah.
Were you an Oscar Robinson fan?
I was, man. The Big O, and you're right. You know, he went to University of Cincinnati, of course, and then played for the Cincinnati Royals, which was the pro team there. My brother-in-law, my oldest sister's husband, went to University of Cincinnati same time he did. Now, he played football, but Oscar, of course, played basketball. But we talked about him all the time. But he, no question, was out, and it's still one of my idols. I mean, the Big O, I mean, he was, you know, back then, he was 6'5", and he was a guard. He was one of the first big guards to play both college and professional basketball. And you know, the Big O invented the triple-double. He invented the triple-double. He was scoring triple-doubles back in the 50s when they didn't call him that.
Yeah.
But he was always good for 25, 30 points, 12 rebounds, and 12, 15 assists. Always, every night. And he was smooth. He wasn't that fast or quick, but he was big for his size. And came from Indianapolis, Indiana, and turned Cincinnati out, man. And, of course, turned the NBA out. And it's turned into be one of the 50 greatest players ever to play the game. I mean, he was fabulous. So, yeah, we loved him in Cincinnati. The Big O is the man.
And I've heard these stories because, you know, basketball is the classic barbershop talk these days, especially with, like, my barbershop's out on the NFL, like a lot of black barbershops, I assume. But we get these talks about, like, you know, this player in this era versus this player in that era. You know, and it'll be some of the old heads talking well, you know, like Bob McAdoo could. It's like, man, Bob McAdoo is in the NBA right now, man. They be killing him.
That's exactly right.
But what was it like the athleticism then? Do you think some of those guys like the Big O could hang with guys these days, or like was it like, because I know a lot of the rules have even changed in my time watching basketball.
Right. Well, no question. And you're right. You have to be careful with that whole, you know, GOAT business. Who was the greatest of all time kind of thing, because it does kind of relate to eras. But some guys and the talent that they have can transcend all that. Now, I think the Big O was one of those, because like I said, he wasn't that quick and wasn't that fast, but nobody, I never remember anybody blocking his shot. Wow. He had that jump shot that he put over the top of his head, and so I think he'd get 20 points on you no matter who you were, because he knew how to back you down as a 6'5" guard. He could turn on you, he could take it, he had all the shots. He could assist. I mean, he was good. Now, all the players aren't like that, and so you got to be careful to see if they could transcend different areas or eras. And so I don't know how far Michael Jordan could have gone back and still been as great as he is. Now, LeBron James, another question, because he's just a beast, and so he might be able to transcend all those areas. You know, you don't know. So, but that's what creates the barber top talk, because everybody's got an idea of who they think is best. But I'd put Oscar Robinson in just about any era, and I'd keep my money on him. Okay. I think he's going to get 20 points on you. I don't care who you are.
Okay. Now playing then, as I love the basketball talk, favorite sport. So, what the street ball versus organized ball.
Right.
Was it a big difference in that era? Because that's where I think, like, nowadays guys can play a little bit more street ball in the organized ball, whereas then I don't know if it was like that.
Yeah, you're right. You know, I think it's still the same way. I mean, street ball has its own brand, and you're right. There's some guys that can just, you know, when they play street ball and just tear it up, beat everybody, beat anybody. You put them in an organized game, send them off to college, and they average 3 points a game. You know, it doesn't transcend. So I think it's the same issue with street ball versus, you know, the professional ranks as it was all the time. That some folks can transcend their talent and others can't. So the talent's different, their expertise is different. But street ball. They talked about that out of New York. When the guys played in the Rucker League, and they had some guys up there, and all those guys, Lou Alcindor and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all those guys, when they came out there, they said, "Man, there's some guys in there that were just phenomenal, but they never could make it to the pros." But they felt that those guys were much better. It's just I think it's a mindset more than anything else, because athletic talent is athletic talent. And if you're able to coach that in the right way, you get a good coach, he can take athletic talent and win anywhere.
Okay, and as we talk about coaching and going anywhere, you were going to U of M at that time too, mid-'60s. This is like before the rebellion. The 60s was a unique time in America. I was talking to my dad about this a couple days ago when he was saying, like, even with today and the temperature, and I'm like, a lot of things were changing for the reality for most America, because the idea of Americana and buying into the American dream and everybody being able to get the white picket fence there was some things challenging this in that time in the 60s.
Yep, no question. Those were turbulent times. There's no question about it. I mean, the rebellions and the riots in the cities were beginning then. The Watts riot was in 65, 66 before we did our thing in 67. In Newark blew up. Yeah. Chicago blew up. University of Michigan was a hotbed for activism. You had some pretty wild white folks up there too.
And that's what I was going to ask.
And so when we got there, I mean, it was a predominantly white school. Unfortunately, today it is still that.
Yes.
When we got there, they had about 40,000 students. We came in there. There was only 350 African American students out of 40,000. So we were 1/10 of 1% of that school. So when we went up there, I mean, it was pretty desolate. I went to engineering school, which of course was even worse in terms of its percentage. And Saul and I were roommates, but when I went to South Engineering, walking across the campus, I could walk across campus and go to class and come back for a week, never see another black person except my roommate. It was pretty desolate up there. It was pretty tough. We were isolated, and of course that forced us to be much more united. And so Kappas was hanging with Alphas and hanging with Omegas and the Deltas and AK. Everybody was together. There wasn't no splitting then because there was so few of us. So the advantage of that is that we didn't get off into our little areas. Everybody was in. So we had a good tight-knit groups for about 3, 4, 5 years during that period when we were coming up. U of M had what they call the Opportunity Award Scholarship Program, where they were actively trying to recruit more African Americans. And so as they brought more up, we came up in 65, it was about 300 of it. 66, then they got about 400 or 500. So they would get a little bit more each year, and it got a little bit larger. Back then, as you know, that's when the Black Action Movement started. Joanne Watson was up there. She was one of the activists of the Black Action Movement, Ron Thompson, and a lot of folks up there. And so we set some goals. And we set the goal of having 10% of the population of that university, we said, should be African Americans. In 2018, we still ain't at 10%.
And along that line, and that's another one of my godmothers, and Mama Watson, and I've asked her about him, but with you in front of me, I gotta ask this too, because it's a tough read, but my friend told me to check it out. But Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, Professor Harold Cruz, that was up there at U of M. Did you have his class? Do you remember him on campus?
I didn't, because see, I was in engineering, and so we had our own thing. We had South Engineering, West Engineering, and then North Engineering is where all the labs were. Now the folks that were in LS&A, Literature, Science, and Arts, and those were on the main campus, and so they were exposed to him. My roommate, I think, had a couple of his classes, and so I went on, of course, to law school. But I was kind of segregated from that, and so I got it from a secondary basis of listening to Saul and some of the other folks as they went to their classes. And so I didn't have the pleasure of having direct exposure to that, but he was in a minority up there. I mean, those were tough times up there, man. I mean, they didn't tolerate a lot of stuff up there. It was very difficult. A lot of people, the transition from their respective high schools, even those of us that came from Cass, but those that came from other cities in Michigan and outside of that, I think after the first semester, all of us was on probation. it was those were tough times, and we pulled out. When I started in engineering, and because of the Opportunity Awards program, we probably had about 25 or 30 of us in the incoming class out of about a couple hundred. And that's the largest they'd ever had, and that was in 1965. By the time we graduated in 1969, 5 of us walked across that stage.
Wow.
Me and Boudreaux and Larry Collins and Terry Banks from D.C., man, it weren't a lot. So it was those were tough times academically. Now, it prepared us well for life and what we were going to encounter after we got out of there, but the experience was very difficult, highly racial, obviously, and night and day between there and 90 miles away up in East Lansing. We had a lot of friends from Detroit that went to Lansing, and it was just a different experience. And we could see it in the alumni activities that still go on today. I mean, their alumni activities, Black Alumni Actions, are much more active than ours are. And for a long time, we couldn't figure out why that was. How come they can get more people at their Black alumni reunions than we can get? And we finally figured out that because we didn't have a good experience.
Yeah.
When we were at University of Michigan.
It may be open in some
and
rooms.
So coming back to celebrate and acknowledge that was just not something that enthused. Everybody was just, I know I was just glad to get out of there, get my degree and get the hell out of there. Whereas it was a big time party up at Michigan State, so we used to go up there a lot.
Yes,
as
many people have.
We had a lot of
in
friends.
School, out of school.
And so we'd always tease them about that, say that was the party school. But good folks, I sent my daughter up there. She went to Michigan State, so I sent a lot of money up there. And
I'm sure they appreciate you for
that. No question about that. But those were hard times and interesting times because it was the 60s. And that was a pretty raucous time in America in general, both black and white.
And in that, as you talk about raucous time, black and white, another one of these talks with my dad, it's almost like I feel like I'm talking with you and my dad in the room, but because he went to UC. And I was like, well, it's these snapshots that you just assume. And I was like, well, you went to college. And he was like, I easily could have been drafted too to go to Vietnam. And I was like, I thought if you went to college, that couldn't happen. And he was like, no. That's what he said.
They were still drafting folks, man. Back then, because it was the Vietnam War, so they were drafting everything and not necessarily just walking. I can remember going down because you did your physical then down at Fort Wayne. And I remember going down there because they got me once I lost my student deferment, my 2S. And hell, there was guys down there on crutches, canes. They were passing, sending them through because they needed everybody they could get going over to that Vietnam War. It was a terrible time, man.
And that's what I think when I think of that generation of guys that were of age in the 60s. What was that like seeing some of like your brothers, cousins, uncles, and really like your peers come back?
Yeah. Oh, it was rough,
Vietnam.
man. We, back then you had the draft board. And it was almost like council districts. The draft board had various districts around the state. And you had somebody that was the head of your draft board. And our neighborhood, Russell Woods, was headed up by a lady named Ida Lee. I still remember her name because she knew us all personally. Because, see, once you got to be 18, you got from high school. Yes, I'm telling you.
So basically almost like when you filled out.
Oh, she was tracking you. She was tracking you. And so you graduated from 18, you had to register for the draft. Put your name in. Now,
selective service was what my
mom
forced me to do.
Selective service. Ida Lee headed up our draft board.
Damn,
she was
scary.
downtown, man.
That's scary.
And she knew us by name, and so you had to register. And if you were going to college and you could prove you were in college, she'd give you a 2S. It was student deferment, and that was good until you graduated. And then 4F, they wouldn't draft you at all if you just had some serious health problems. 1Y was another category. And so we watched a lot of our friends in Russell Woods who didn't go to college, Charlie Hood and some of these other guys got drafted and went to NAM. Some of them came back, some of them didn't. And it was real back then. There's no question. And when I graduated in 69, I graduated in December of 69. I think it was somewhere around December 11th. On December 15th, I had a letter from Ida Lee saying, your 2S is gone. You need to come see me. They were not messing around then. And so I literally had the greetings letter. Now, I managed to, with the grace of God, get out of that, and that's another longer story. But it was something else. Now, some people got work deferments depending on where you went to work after college. Your corporation could apply and get a work deferment for you and everything, but she was trying her best to get you to 1A, which is you're out of here and taking the ship on your way over to the Vietnam. They needed bodies, and of course, you know, it was still the worst war we've been in history. But it was tough times. So a lot of people left out of Russellwood. Some didn't come back, some did. And those that did weren't the same as they were when they left.
And that's like the pulse of like what my dad says, because that conflict, war, I don't know, crises, I'm not sure how it wants to be labeled, changed a lot of the temperature of America.
Yep.
And definitely Black America moving forward. And with that moving forward, and you being peers with some of these guys, and then seeing your dad like work in the space of being able to find employment, represent who these guys are that are still going through, like right now we have the label of PTSD, but back then I don't even know if that was like a label.
It was a legitimate label.
They were calling it shell shocked or something.
Yeah, that's right. You know, they were traumatized, but it was just called something different.
Yeah,
because you know, you think about it, there's no way that you can go day in and day out dodging bullets, seeing your friends killed, seeing a guy's head get blown off next to you, or you blowing somebody's head off, because that's just the name of the game in war, and to think that that's not going to have a long-term impact on you, that's just unrealistic. And that was day in, day out. And of course that goes on in any war. I mean, if you're in Iran, Iraq, any of that over there now, it's the same thing. And so they come back absolutely traumatized and don't get the kind of support and wraparound services they should be getting from the Veterans Administration, which is one of the multitude of sins that Trump is doing now. But you know, it's tragic what we ask these soldiers to go through, and the kind of support that they get when they get back home is just not what it ought to be. War is not a good thing.
So after college for you, being that you definitely didn't end up there,
right? That's right.
What was working like, and what was setting up where you're at? You definitely had a big shadow of your dad at this point in time,
and my brother.
Oh, so and your brother.
So I had some shoes to fill, absolutely. Because Bill Beckham Jr. was no slouch either. But we all came out of that same mold. But as I mentioned earlier, I mean, I always knew from the time I was a kid that I wanted to be an automotive engineer. I was just into cars. And so that's what took me to Cass Tech. That's what took me to U of M. That's what got me my mechanical engineering degree with a specialty in automotive engineering. So I knew I was going to work in the automotive industry. I ended up picking General Motors because they were the biggest and the best as far as I knew. And so I was fortunate enough to get in there. Now, I started out washing windows down at the GM building in the summer.
Getting in the dough.
Yeah.
Getting in the dough.
There you go. And did that for a summer. And then my last summer before I graduated from U of M, I was able to get an internship at the GM Proving Grounds out in Milford. So that took me then right into, on graduation, a leg up in going into General Motors. And I started at Chevrolet Engineering at the GM Tech Center in Warren in January of 1970. And that's when my automotive engineering career started. And so when I finished all of my public service stuff, I had 14 years seniority in with General Motors, which a lot of people didn't know. But while I was doing that, of course, Coleman Young gets elected in 1973, first African-American mayor in Detroit, chose my brother to be his first chief of staff and deputy mayor. So when they started to need an African-American with a technical background and somebody they knew was going to be loyal to them, I fit that category.
Ain't that something?
So bingo, they picked me. And so my first assignment and first appointment was I was vice president of the Public Lighting Commission in City of Detroit, and that was in 1974.
All right, now
and
was it one of those?
Working ever since.
Was it one of those things where it was like, because it's your older brother, it's like, hey, this is what you gonna do? Or was it one of those things like, no, this would be really cool? Like, what was it?
It was a little bit of both of that, but it was mostly, this is what you're gonna do. This is what we need, and come on in here, and this is how you're gonna do it. But it was cool. It was a great experience, and I was able to, in that particular position, still work at General Motors while I did that. So it helped GM because this was their then civic commitment to the city as a corporation. It helped the mayor because he's like, okay, I got, GM's giving me some executives on loan. Some of the jobs I then had, however, required me to leave GM, so they would allow me to go on leave of absence. And so for the next 5 to 6 years, I went back and forth between GM and the city as the mayor's needs fluctuated and as General Motors needs fluctuated, because I'd get to the city and I'd be working on something and they'd call and say, hey, we need you back over here. We got another job for you as a promotion. Because my goal when I came out of college, Kyrie, and went to GM, my goal was to be the first black chief engineer.
Wow.
And they still don't have one today, but that was my goal. And I gotta say that I was on track. They put me on a fast track, and I was on track to being there, and quite frankly, ahead of my schedule. And then Coleman would pull me back and forth. And so a lot of people think, well, you just, feeding off of the city trough. No. I didn't ask for those jobs. I had a career.
Yeah.
Over here.
And your
General
brother
Motors.
was like, hey, you my little brother.
So I came over here, and it's been a pleasure in these 40-some odd years to serve Detroiters. And so I don't begrudge that. It's been an honor to do it, and I've done it for 6 mayors now. But I had a career over there, and that was my plan. But after 1984 and my conviction on the Vista situation, General Motors gave me a call and said, well, Charlie, you either got to resign or we're going to have to
let you go.
Cut you go. And now, so that ended my career at General Motors in August of 84.
Now, in that, I like to, because I graduated from Walsh, and when I graduated, people like to talk about the fall of General Motors. And I like to try to put sometimes General Motors into perspective. General Motors, especially at that time, it was like Rome. Like I tell people, I would sit and I would debate my professors in class at Walsh. Like they would be like, General Motors should have known this or General Motors should have known that. I was like, General Motors made like double the amount of money and then like almost every corporation in America combined. Exactly. It was like General Motors was so big. I was kind of telling this to General Motors, to me, I say, was the Michael Jackson of business. So when Michael Jackson passed away, and I was talking to my little sister, like I was like, when Ronald Reagan met Michael Jackson, it wasn't Michael Jackson meeting the president. It was the president meeting Michael Jackson. General Motors was so big at one point in time.
Well, back then, it was in fact the largest corporation in the world back then. It was a huge behemoth. It had 5 automotive divisions, but it had other divisions too. It used to make appliances in their Frigidaire division. It made railroad locomotives in their Delco Moraine. They made their own brakes, their own components and suspension systems, and they did all kinds of stuff, man. Out at the tech center, they had the research laboratories. The first mechanical heart was invented at the research labs at General Motors Tech Center. It was a huge corporation. So as
it was continuing to grow, and you were in there at that time, and I didn't notice, because I think people look at it back at, people take these snapshots of history and just surmise it. And people right now look at the surmise of General Motors like it was just running rampant, and people did not realize that the shadow would come. Like Rome, everything has an ebb and flow. But
nothing lasts
did
forever.
you all realize that General, this is huge? Did you all recognize that?
Oh yeah, you always knew that. As I say, I started at Chevrolet, which of course was the largest of the 5 divisions. But we always knew that there were those other 4 divisions, and quite frankly, the way the corporation was set up, most of the CEOs would facilitate competition among those divisions. That's how big they were. Chevrolet was larger than most regular corporations.
Yeah.
Chevrolet was bigger than all of Ford Motor Company back then.
And
it was just a division, and so we knew that it was huge. And I worked at several divisions. I worked at Buick for a while. I had some engineering staff function jobs which got me exposure to all 5 of the divisions. So I did work down at Cadillac in Detroit, and Buick up in Flint, and Oldsmobile in Lansing. And so I got around quite a bit, which was part of my being on the fast track. But it was clear to you that this was a huge corporation. There's no question about it. But it was the largest, and at that time, the best automotive corporation in the world, man. It had all the facilities, the GM proving grounds in Milford. We had a proving grounds out in Phoenix, Arizona. We had a proving grounds in Denver, Colorado. Facilities all over the country. We had 26 assembly plants around the country. I had a job that got me into all of those at once, and so I've been to all of the 26 assembly plants around there. And so even if you just stood in one of the assembly plants and watched cars come off the line one every 55 seconds, it would put into perspective just how large this thing was, and the fact that you could put something together that has 2,500, 3,000 parts and have it coming off the end of the line every 55 seconds and the guy gets in there and turns the key and it starts up and you can roll off. You're like, man, this is really something. So to me, as an engineer and a young engineer, it was an amazing experience, and to be a part of that, it's phenomenal. There's no question about it.
Were some of the Japanese car companies and was like AMC like pulling the chains of all you guys like you be at like a bar and a guy from American Motors be like, so what will it take to
right to pull you? Well, I didn't get much because in those years when I was there, in the 70s, those guys, the foreign car companies weren't as prevalent then in Michigan. I mean, now, there's as many of those around here in Detroit and some other places as there are the domestic
local
companies, but they were still kind of a novelty back then.
Okay, and what about even just the locals like AMC and Ford and Chrysler? Were they like looking to poach all the GM talent?
Yeah. I mean, the Ford people were. I had a few friends that went to Ford. One of the guys that graduated with me, Larry Collins from U of M, he went initially to Ford, and so I knew some people over there. And don't get me wrong, Ford was not a slouch. They just weren't as big as General Motors, but they knew how to do some cars. And so they were competitive. I mean, they would hang in there. And so we'd have some friendly rivalries and those kinds of conversations. But GM was still the godfather, man.
It was huge.
GM was the godfather. It was huge. Largest corporation. Where I remember when the CEO, the chairman and the CEO finally got to the point where he made $1 million. And that just astounded me. I remember having that conversation with my dad and saying, how could any one person be worth $1 million? But it puts in perspective how much the company must be making, what he's responsible for, when then the board of directors would think that his compensation should be $1 million.
Yeah.
And so it puts things in perspective. It was incredible, and I tell you, the other experience I had, and the reason I would also question it, because I told you I washed windows down at the GM building, and of course that's where the executives were up on the 14th floor.
Yeah. Now
they wouldn't let all of us up there because that's high cotton up there. But I got a few times to be up there, and I can remember being up there one time and being in the chairman's office. And what struck me most, we went in first of all to do the windows, and it was different doing windows up there. You couldn't do like you did down on the second floor.
I can imagine.
You had to have one guy hold one drape, another guy hold the other drape,
Hilarious.
While the third guy watched the window.
Hey.
And I remember doing that, but I remember sitting there, and the chairman was just shooting the shit with us, and had nothing on his desk. And so that's when I asked my dad, how could this cat be worth $1 million? I was in his office, and I'm telling you, wasn't much happening up there.
The proximity of it.
That always sticks in my mind. Now, as I've gotten to be an executive in some positions myself, I know there's times when you're not always just, nose to the grindstone. And so when the washers come in, maybe you do want to shoot the shit with them because you don't talk to cats like that on a regular basis when you're up there. And so he carried on the conversation, was a nice guy. But he wasn't doing a lot of work.
Now, when we talk about that, I think as I grow with my organization and my experience, people skills becomes one of the most paramount things.
No question.
And people talk about your people skills and just understanding systems and people. And I believe it was, moments in time in Detroit's history. It's people, especially the Coleman Young's election. It's every time I talk to somebody, it's like, we were the main people that helped them get elected. It's like, I'm like, and I actually kind of believe everybody's story because the conviction and the passion they say. But Coleman connected with so many groups of people where they all felt so materially invested in the success of Coleman Young.
Yep, no question about it. He was the guy. I mean, he was gifted. There was nobody like him, and probably will not be anybody coming down the pike. And you're right. He had the gift of being able to talk to the cats that he hung out with on the corner on the east side. And then he could turn around, as you know, he could then pick up the phone and be talking to the president and Jimmy Carter in the next breath.
Yeah.
Or Henry Ford II, where they were good friends.
Yes.
Al Taubman, Max Fisher. But then he could go in the barbershop and talk shit with them on Friday afternoon. And so he had that ability and that gift that made you feel like when you were talking to him, you were just his friend and one of the guys. And it was impossible to be around him and not come away having learned something. He was just a brilliant guy, high school graduated from Easton High School, didn't go to college, but read everything he could get his hands on. He was always reading. And so he was just an intelligent, one-of-a-kind kind of guy. He was a quick learner. He could pick up stuff. I mean, when I was running the water and sewer department, some of that stuff was pretty technical, and I'd have to brief him for a press conference or something. He and I would just sit down for a couple of minutes, and he'd pick it up. Next thing I know, he's out giving a speech on it.
Wow.
He had that kind of recall, and he was just an outstanding guy. There's no question. There's nobody like him ever again.
And when I think about him, is the reverence so much of Detroit has, I also think it was a different era for his lieutenants. So like I think about you and Miss Ponders and Ed Vaughn, like
there you go.
Like some of these people are like really had such a I don't even know what's the right term, like a commitment beyond self-interest in the success of what they do. Dan Aldrich.
There you go.
For
all
what
them
it
good
meant.
guys, all the people you're talking about.
So
good guys.
so like, and when I look at a lot of like kind of in my era, and I guess things change and different things, like it's almost like, okay, self-interest first and the success of the project second. It seems to be amongst our people, like that has become a more like, I want to make sure my family's good and I want to make sure that's good. And then, the success of this project, but it seems as if, in talking to them, it was like, look, the success of this project is the paramount idea and we're all invested to that.
Yep.
Was that, you think, because of him? Or was it just a consciousness of the black community at the time?
No, there's no question it started with him. It started right at the top because he was that kind of guy. And he was a keen sense of judgment of character. And so anybody that didn't have that same sense of we here to help the people, he just wouldn't have you around. And there are some folks that know today that, he kept them outside of the circle because they just weren't a part of that.
They weren't cut that way.
They weren't cut that way. And so he set that tone, and it started right at the top. And that's why it was such a pleasure working for him, because you knew what the deal was. You served at his pleasure as an appointee, and it was that. And it was a pleasure. But, he if you didn't toe the line, he would unappoint you. And he was not shy about that. But he set that tone. That's how we're going to do this. Here's how we do, and here's why. And he was such an overpowering presence of that you couldn't and wouldn't dare try to go crosswise with that and still be close to him. You just wasn't going to survive if you did it. And so as a result, after a while, it just became part of the synergy of the people that even came and wanted to work for him. Those other kind of folk never even tried to apply.
So let's talk about that. As you've been with now General Motors, U of M, you've seen your father with the UAW. How do you? What would you say if someone's looking to create a culture of whatever it may be around including people? Because even me, I had this question: like, how do you build? What have you seen be some of the most successful ways to build a culture of whatever you want to design?
Well, see, and I think you hit it already. You did an excellent job of describing the selflessness of wanting to advance people or advance an environment for folk without looking out for yourself first, and just looking for the people. And so if you set that as the tone, if that's clear in terms of what you're doing, people gravitate to that. Those that buy into that same piece. Those that don't buy into it, those will be the ones that, they're going to be fighting you, pulling on your shirt, trying to pull you back. You know who they are. But most people and most human beings like helping folk. And so if that's your mantra, if that's what you're all about, that's how you lead, then the rest just falls in place. And so that's why I've always done it. But you're right. I learned that from my brother and from my father. And my father and Coleman were good friends because they were in the union together.
Yes.
And so, like minds think alike. And so all these guys were doing the same kind of stuff. And so, the Buddy Battles and the Mark Steps and the guys from the UAW, the union guys, man. Those guys back in the day, that's what the union did. But Walter Reuther set that tone at the UAW. The UAW was just as much a civil rights organization as it was a union back in that day, looking out for folks and the least of these, and challenging the system and making sure people could get a decent wage and feed their family. And the UAW and unions created the middle class, and it started right here in Detroit. Folks making good money, a good day's pay for a good day's work. And so once you lead that way, it becomes easy, because that's what you do every day. But if you start looking out for me and yourself, people read through that very quickly, and it's very difficult to lead that way.
Now, and you talk about Walter Reuther, and you're way more connected to this than through your father and his relationship, as the roots of the union start like a lot of things in America, strong and racist.
No question.
It started because it was like, I do not want a black man working
over here next to me, making the same kind of money I'm making.
But Walter Reuther was one to be like, no. Let's change this design.
That's right.
So now the intentionality of bringing on your father after seeing those skill sets, what was it like changing and shifting? Because there were other people like the Coleman Youngs and the Jimmy Boggs and other figures just in union politics. But what was that like, witnessing that at a young age and seeing another cultural shift in the thought process?
Well, it was enlightening, and it did set the tone, and you're right. I mean, obviously, Walter Reuther saw that in my dad way down in Ohio, and when he was an international rep and working down there, and, Reuther would come down there and say, I like the way this guy works here, and so said, I need him on my staff up in Detroit, and pulled him up. Now, everybody in the union didn't like Walter Reuther, even when he was the president, and if you remember, in the late 50s, somebody tried to assassinate Walter Reuther.
Yeah.
And they ain't sure whether it was another union guy or just some crackpot or who. And he lived out on the east side of Detroit at the time. So those were tough times, but the key to that kind of stuff is consistent and compassionate leadership. You keep doing it no matter who's chomping at you, pulling on you, you're going to win out at the end. And Walter Reuther he was a tough son of a bitch. And he led differently than a Leonard Woodcock and Doug Fraser who came after him. The union was different after that. But Reuther set that tone with the UAW in terms of what it was all about, and that set the UAW apart from some of the other unions, even the larger unions, because they knew they were about the common man. They were about equality, justice. No black, white didn't make any difference. Everybody makes the same pay. We fighting for everybody. And they set that tone. And so my dad being a part of that, but the reason he was a part of it because Walter Reuther saw in him that same kind of consistent, compassionate leadership and people following him, and they weren't following everybody else. And that's how you get there. And so my brother adopted that path, and so he made his mark here in Detroit, and then I had to try to fill both sets of shoes between my dad and my father, and I'm still trying to step in those shoes, and I'm coming to the end. But I'm proud of what they did, and the marks that we've left on Detroit trying to help folks.
Now, we talked about this, and this is such a great conversation. I feel like you're going to be like, all right, I got to get out of here in a second. But
no, I'm good, man. I'm good.
I do got to ask your mom's side. As you talk about just even at that time and that awareness, here's someone else that I'm sure you had a relationship with because he was one of Coleman's best friends, too. And his daughter, Fred G. Sampson, and his daughter, Frida Sampson, always talks about
Sampson.
Yep, Reverend Sampson.
Oh yeah.
My she's like, well, my mother with my dad would sometimes be worried about him, especially when he was leaving Louisville and the way he was moving and everything. Yeah. How was your mother's response to just because it was very revolutionary, the work that Walter P. Reuther was doing. So being the black guy working with him, it's like, it's like, whoa. Like, what was your mother's response to this? Was there any, like the encouragement? Was it the fear? Was it what was her state of mind to be supportive of a man in that state?
And that's a good question, and my mom was always supportive. My mother was a little woman, man. She wasn't even 5 feet tall, weighed less than 100 pounds, quiet all the time. The opposite of my dad, who was 6'1", always over 200 pounds, big guy. but always very supportive. And she was one of these quiet, just supportive ladies that just took care of business at home. You go do what you do out there in the world, and I got this back here. So we never missed a meal. We never missed being clothed. We never missed any of the stuff that had to happen around the house. Dinner every day, 6 o'clock, like clockwork. In my dad's early union days in Ohio, hell, he wasn't even home during the week because he was traveling around Ohio doing the union piece, which is how Walter Reuther saw him. But so the weekends were his time to come home. And what she made sure of, I mean, his thing was we're going to all eat together when I do get home. So every Saturday, Sunday, that's where we did our round table discussions. And she put all of that together. She was the base of all of that. And so she never said much, never talked much. I don't think I ever saw them argue more than twice the whole time I was around. Now,
are you serious?
Now, Dad would always tell us, he said, now, y'all think your mama's quiet. Some of them nights when y'all sleep, she's all over my ass, but y'all don't ever see that. And she never showed us that. But she was just unbelievable low. And as a result, my dad would return that loyalty to her for her doing that. But she was one of those, and I'm not, that doesn't happen today. Women are a little different today in terms of how they show their support, and I'm all for it. I'm not suggesting that women even ought to be like that today, but that worked for them then. My mother never worked outside of the house. They were married for almost 50 years. She never worked. My mother didn't get her driver's license until my dad died when she was 67.
Wow. And I think about some of these women like Mrs. Sampson, Coretta King,
There you go.
Malik, Betty Shabazz.
Yes.
Like I think about like how strong some of these women were. Mrs. Franklin, like what was the, like, how do you think that encouragement, especially when you are like I think these strong male figures in life facing so much at a time, to come home to somebody that is encouraging you?
Yeah, no question. I mean, it takes a special kind of woman, man. I joke about it, but it's not necessarily a joke. I talk about all the years that I've put in, and I've had 3 wives, and because, and I had one of those ex-wives tell me that Charlie, part of the problem was that you had 4 wives, and the 4th wife was the city, and Detroit, and the politics that you were in. I hadn't thought about it that way. But you're right. When you see these guys, whether it's Jesse Jackson, Martin Luther King, Coleman Young, all of these guys, there's a strong woman back there, and it's an unusual kind of woman, because I'm telling you, for those guys to be as strong as they are as black people in America, and the things that they have to do and the sacrifices they make and what they have to take, that becomes number one. And that's contrary to what a woman wants in a relationship. Because what she wants is to be number one, and quite frankly deserves that. But when you have found yourself, unfortunately, with a guy who has this other yearning and other talent and ability that quite frankly has to be used, somebody gonna have to sacrifice, and it's usually that woman. So it takes a special kind of woman to be married to that and still be supportive, and then take a back seat. That ain't easy. And so my 3 ex-wives, I love them to death, because they did support me through some times that they didn't have to, and I know they didn't want to, but they did. And so that helped me to get through some of those tough times. And so I know every one of them guys, and Coleman was married 3 times. People didn't know that. But he had good, strong women when they stuck with him, because you have to have that. And it takes a special kind of African-American woman to support an African-American brother with the challenges that we have here in America, and that still exists today.
I mean, I just, even in my dating journey, I always get the, people make time for what they make time for, and I think to myself, like, man, that's a very tough thing to think about, because I've been making time for my mission in life for like 15 years.
Hard,
so it's like,
man.
I don't know, like I'm balancing that out, and
That's
I
right.
always think to like,
it's hard. And see, people always say, Curry, and the women will run that on you at some point. Well, you do what you want to do.
that statement too.
and see, that's not necessarily the case, because some of us have been put down here to do some things that's what we made to do. God gave us that talent, that gift, and shame on us if we don't do it. And so it ain't about because I just want to do it. I gotta do it. Now the problem is you got to find somebody else that understands that and accepts that too. Because if they think you just doing all this stuff out in the streets because that's what you want to do, then they're not going to support you the same way. But if they understand that that's your mission, and then they buy into the mission, now you got something. Now, having said that, that does mean that usually that woman's going to make some sacrifice. And that's why I say it takes a special woman to do that. And I ain't mad at those that say, well, I hear you, but I ain't buying into all that. You know?
And I can only imagine what it's like, because probably, and then sometimes I've been having more of a presence of mind, just even in my journey. And I mean, I'm doing way less, but like sometimes my day may start where like I'm doing this, then I'll go to like an opening of like an event, like some grand business opening, then some friends event. Like I can't, like, you know, it's like you grow and you end up in the zone, but you may end up like just in what you were talking about. So like it was a point in time in your life where you are at a pivotal time in American history,
yes sir,
in like the Black Mayor movement,
yes sir,
with the Black Mayor of the blackest city of them all.
Yes, sir. Been there.
And then you're also shifting time to work for the biggest corporation in the world. And then you're still a brother, a son. Like you still have family stuff to balance out. Because I know the black family is still the black family.
Yeah, no question.
You still got your cousin where it's like he ain't gonna never have a job. So
let
me sort of give him a job.
Right.
You know. So you're still doing that, and then it's like, oh yeah, let me. I do have her.
Yeah, and she said, well, what about me? And so the key I've found as I've gotten to be now in my 70s is you got to figure out a way to give her enough time to show her that you appreciate what she's doing. You're not going to ever be able to give her enough
what she deserves,
and what she deserves, but if you can hit enough times, you can kind of make it. But again, it takes a special woman to do that. And if you find that, hold on to it, man. Don't give it up, because it's rare.
And as we talk about that, your mom's background, where is she from?
Well, as I say, she was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
She was born in the Laurel homes too, and came from a big family. She had 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and her mom was a housewife also, my grandmother, and she was just a dyed-in-wool Cincinnatian. And when my dad had to come home and tell us we was going to Detroit, it wasn't no happy home, man, because, you know, he's taking my mother out, and we don't know nothing about Detroit. He said, we're going to Detroit. We're like, what, Detroit? And all my mother ever knew was Cincinnati. My older sister's getting ready to get married, engaged, so you know she don't want to go because her man is still there in Cincinnati. My brother is in his senior year, and how he like, I'm moving in my senior year. My middle sister, she'd been going out to Walnut Hills. She didn't think there was another school in the world like Walnut Hills, so she figured, I'm not leaving. And I got all my little friends. I'm 9, 10 years old. I'm like, I can't leave my friends. And so when my dad had to come home and say, well, we leaving, I mean, he literally had to be the strong-willed black man that he was and say, I hear all y'all, but pack up because we going. And we left and came to Detroit, but it was tough. He was going against the grain, and it reminds me of a story. And my staff, I told it yesterday as we were putting this together, and I got a little more time here so I can do it. They said, Charlie, you can't put that in the play; it takes too long. But I likened that decision that he made when Martin Luther King was a 26-year-old preacher in Montgomery, and they were starting the boys boycott, and they went to a couple of meetings deciding how they were going to put together the Birmingham Improvement Association. And because he was talking so much back in the back, somebody said, you need to be the president of this. And he was like, damn. So they appointed him as president, him and Shuttlesworth. So they were walking home, and Shuttlesworth said, man, you 26. He said, how we going to deal with all these white people down here? He said, I ain't worried about these white people. I don't know how I'm going to go home and tell Coretta.
What about the black woman
at
home?
He said, I got to figure out how I'm going to go home and tell Coretta. And so that reminded me of that my dad was facing that same thing, that, you know, when Walter Reuther told him, you know, I want you to, he's probably like, man, what an opportunity. But now he got to figure out how he going home. And I'm telling you, we were a pretty sad family for a little while until we understood what that meant, him getting that job. None of us did at the time.
Now, another thing, as you mentioned, is you said your mother learned to drive when your father passed.
Yes.
And that's 67. And in the grand scheme of just life, a lot of that stress of that work and the burdens that are taken on with, especially with black men, almost the I don't even know what it is. It's almost like an armor. We're like Iron Man or something of dealing with different things. That consciousness of what that's like too.
Yep.
Do you think in that path of, like you say, doing what you feel that your purpose in life is to do, but still balancing out the self-care of it, in retrospect, as you look at some of the moves and the stress that your dad was dealing with, if approached differently, do you think he would have done some of those moves differently?
No question about that. I mean, life is what it is, and so you do certain things, and you do them because you think they're the right thing to do at the time. If you're faced with a different set of circumstances, you probably do some things different. I mean, that's the crux of the title of my one-man show. And I say, that sometimes in life, you do stuff and you look back on, you figure, why in the world did I do that? And what was I thinking? And, this was a terrible result here. And the only thing you can come up with that keeps you from going insane is that you have to tell yourself, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Based on the evidence that was presented, it was the best.
So that's the title of my play, see, because I done a bunch of that, in my 70-something years. But man, I don't know why I did that decision. Like when I threw the FBI out of my office when they was coming in and doing the Vista investigation, I threw their asses out. Well, that probably wasn't the best thing to do, but it seemed like a good idea at the
time. I've seen many of people deal with the feds same way.
Yeah, and so, so things would be different. Everybody, if you had a do-over or a mulligan for those that play golf, you'd hit the shot differently. When you get a mulligan, you taking the ball and putting it back in the spot you want it to be rather than the spot that it fell in, see? But we don't get do-overs in life. So you do the best you can heading through. And when you look back, hopefully you made more good turns than bad.
Okay. Now, in that good turns and bad, growing your family. You mentioned your daughter.
Yes.
How has your family grown? And then what was that like stepping into with everything already on your plate, being a father too?
Oh, man, it was wild. See, I wasn't just a father. I was a single father. I raised my daughter for a good portion of her life, particularly through her formative years, best years of my life. Now, I don't know how the hell I did it and how I found the time because, I was then also still trying to make my mark in Detroit. But, that was my daughter. I only had one child. And so I was going to give it my all. And so I did it. But as a result, we were unbelievably close. We still are today. And what it did for me is two things. It made me close to my daughter, but it also gave me more appreciation to all these single mothers out here. That shit is hard, man. And I raised her through the teen years,
Oh, I can imagine.
Whereas Bill Cosby say the kids turn teenagers, they go crazy. They just go crazy, you know. And you have to hang in there. And so I was able to do that. I was fortunate. It was a circumstance that allowed it to happen. But it was tough, and I had my own business then through most of that time, but I was able to be successful in that. And then there was a period of time when I went on my government-sponsored vacation. I was still her father.
That's what we call the urban vacation.
And she survived that, and we survived that, and we talk about it. And I'm going to talk about it in the play a little bit, but it was good. And so she's now a grown-ass woman, as they say, raising her own child now as a single parent down in Atlanta, and I'm proud of them. They're just doing great down there. She's got her own business. My granddaughter's in a sophomore in high school down there, and they turning it out down there, so I'm proud of them, man.
Yeah, and I know, like, even looking at my dad, being a grandparent is a
lot.
Man. It's like you get all the fun of what the good side of parenting is with I tell everybody,
grandparenting is much better than parenting. Much better. Oh my God, man.
It's the upside.
I love my granddaughter. Yeah, because everybody you love your grandfather. No matter what they do, your grandparents. They can do no wrong. They love you all the time, and see that ain't always the case when you're a parent, because sometimes they hate your ass.
I know. It's like coming in here talking this common sense.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not trying to hear this. What do you mean, clean my room?
That's right. Man.
Rooms don't need to be cleaned in 2018.
Man, yeah. Grandparenting is much better than parenting, no doubt about it.
So, and then in all of this stuff in the journey, as you've had I'm guessing, with family, friends, and associates, you have a lot of different social circles. So,
yes.
do you have close friends for almost everything? Because even in engineering, so it's engineering, politics, sports, life.
Yep.
Cincinnati. Are you hanging out with different people, talking to everything?
Well, that whole friends thing is tricky, Carrie. And I'm blessed though. I've got a small circle, and when you start talking about very good and best friends, that circle ain't gonna be large, because there's no such thing. But my tight circle of very good best friends, I am so fortunate. First of all of them have been my friends for at least 50 years or more.
Ain't that something?
Which is rare.
Yeah.
Starting with my good friend Saul Green, who we go 60 years, getting ready to go on 61. I mean, we were safety patrol boys at Winterhalter together.
Oh, yeah, that's back in the day.
And I'm so proud of this brother. I mean, he's been the U.S. attorney. He's been the deputy mayor. He's been, area counsel for HUD. I mean, he's doing it. And plus, we just guys, we boys. But, I got, Tom Goss and his wife. I mean, Tom was the athletic director at University of Michigan, largest athletic program in the world. His wife, Carol Goss, was president of the Skillman Foundation. Sidney Ribot, who grew up with us over on the west side, went to McKenzie, was president out in the Cal State system, and was president of Bowling Green University, and then was president of Howard.
Wow.
Personal friend. We grew up together. Ron Thompson, who grew up on Oakman with us, and he goes back almost 60 years. He's on the board of directors of Chrysler. His wife, Cynthia, was chairman of the board of Boy Scouts and girls. And so they're all my close personal friends. They are very successful. They've raised kids, and we're close. And so I feel fortunate, man, to have those kinds of friendships. We still get together now. We got a group they're all part of that group called Brothers Who Cook, and we got to get together and cook food for everybody. But after 50, 60 years, we're still doing that. And so I'm real fortunate, because I tell you, new friends make me nervous.
I don't blame you.
Well,
especially being a person that has what many can label as access to things that most people want, because often it's not even it. And this is what's so weird. I think often it's not really like a person wants to be you as much as they want what their perceived benefits of what you got.
That's right.
So it's I don't necessarily want the burden of all the stuff you got to do.
That's right.
But I don't want to, I don't want to be LeBron James training in the off season. I want the LeBron James check.
That's right.
After the game.
And so when you got folks that go back that far, I mean, Saul's wife, whom he married, I met her the same time he met her. Diane, I mean, she's been a counselor at U of M Dearborn for 40 some odd years, and has mentored all kinds of kids. I mean, so I can call them at any time, any place. We can get together anytime, and it's cool. And so I'm blessed to have that kind of friendship. So I got a good enough circle that I don't have to go looking for that kind of support on a friendship level. And everything they do, they're successful at, and I ain't got to ask them for anything, and they don't ask me for anything. It's that kind of a deal. And so it's great, man. And so you start talking about 40, 50, 60 years, that's significant. That's the good part of my life. Now, I got a lot of good friends too, and I had I had a career at GM, so I've got some long-term General Motors friends too, guys that we started and toiled in the vineyards together, because as I say, I wanted to be the first black chief engineer, but I was one of the first engineers to be hired at General Motors. Now there were a couple of guys that were already there. Odell Johnson came out of Purdue University, Bill Newell was out of North Carolina A&T, and these guys were there a year or so before me, but they were black guys that I looked up to, and we became, we're still friends today. Well, that goes back to 1970, so, that was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I've got them as a group of friends also. So I feel fortunate and blessed, man, with my friendships.
Now, do you think that with these friendships, it's one of those things like, all these old adages, and it's almost one for everything, but the birds of a feather flock together.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it's the people that think like you, that kind of have the same value systems, that have that same work ethic, just end up like associating with you more? Or is it just one of those things where that era kind of produced where you guys were headed?
Well, I think it was a little bit of both, but there's no question that's the case. I mean, you look at Saul and I, again, in Russell Woods, my dad being in the Union, and the kind of strong-willed, strong black man, father kind of figure that he was. Well, Foots Green, who we called Saul's dad, who was like a dad to me too, same kind of guy. Mm-hmm. Strong-willed, ran his house like a ring of that.
Especially if you couldn't cuss playing basketball.
Yeah, ran his household, ran what happened in the yard, started up his own business. I mean, the Michigan Barber School is one of the first black businesses in Detroit. It's certainly the only black barber school. You can't go to a barber anywhere in Detroit that they didn't spend some time at the Michigan Barber School, or they probably got their certificate from there. So he's been creating careers for black people in Detroit for 60 years. And so he's that kind of guy. And so for Saul and I to then gravitate, it was a natural, because we come out of the same environment. Tom Goss, even though he was from Nashville, we didn't meet him until we went to the University of Michigan. You could tell the kind of family he came from. Same kind of family. Ron Thompson and Lurie Thompson, who lived on Oakman. Mr. Thompson was owner of Toll House Cleaners. He was the same kind of way. Owned his own business, hired black folk in the community, stand up in the community. His wife was a school teacher. I mean, so we had all of that in common as you come out. So ain't no question birds of a feather flock together, because a lot of people grew up in Russell Woods, and we didn't necessarily become that level of friends.
Yeah, but they were cut different.
Cut different. Not necessarily better or worse, but just different.
Now, and when you talk about cut different, and you're mentioning a lot of things that that black people had access to then, and there's been a lot of debates, especially with my generation. We talk about, well, we should have did this and we should have did that. Kind of the premise for Crises of the Negro Intellectual.
Right.
Do you often, because I always wonder, like on the flip side, I wonder, are people in their 70s sitting around having these discussions like, these young people got access to this, and this, and that? So with that, do you believe if given more access of today, some of those people that were running, like the Foots Greens, some of the stories of, as you talk about Russell Woods, some of the stories that I hear, because you hear all these street stories, it's like all the main numbers people used to live on Broad Street back in the day.
That's right. There was a few of them in there too. That's right. Over on Fullerton, there was a couple.
And it's like they paid for all the businesses around it. You hear all the. It's like you always hear these street tales. That's what gets told most often. But do you think that some of these people would, with more exposure and more access that even my generation has, would they be moving differently, or would they kind of still stay in those same circles?
No, I think things would certainly have been different. I mean, I look back at the obstacles that, the Bill Beckham seniors and the Foots Greens and the Coleman Youngs and all those folks had to face, and you look at what they accomplished, having to face that, and the meager resources sometimes they had to rely on, and they still did what they did, and you figure, wow, what if they didn't have those obstacles? They would have been different and bigger, even that may be hard to imagine. And my dad used to always tell me, we were growing up, he would say he wanted to be the president of the United States. We're like, damn, Dad, come on, president of the United States. But that's what he thought. He thought that he was smart enough to do that, and he felt that, and so that he instilled that in me. Well, I know Foots Green would probably talk that way in his household too, and Coleman would talk about that, and a lot of the people that we grew up with, but there were always these obstacles. So you always wonder how far you could go if you didn't have, the obstacles against you. my goal was to be the chief engineer. I probably wouldn't have gotten there at GM, but if you take away some of them obstacles, I would have been that. Because when I looked at the ones that were the chief engineers at GM, shit, I was smarter than most of them cats. But sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's the way the plan was laid out and the will that you have to do certain things. But there's no question, if the world was different, the end result would be different. How different, who knows? But one thing for sure, if you're constantly striving to do your thing and your mission, my thing is ain't got nothing coming. I have no regrets. I'm going to talk about my life in a couple of weeks and the trails that I've been down for 71 years. I don't regret none of them, but because everything I did seemed like a good idea at the time, and it was the best I could do. And I was applying what my dad and everybody around me, and growing up under Foots Green and in Russell Woods and around powerful, strong black men, it's what I learned and what Coleman Young. And so I think they'll look down and be proud of what me and my friends have done.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when you talk about that, and with access, as I love Detroit's Black history, one of the stories where I align the world of to my mind, like lieutenants in city government. In your story, I always think before you was Conrad Mallett Sr.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear these stories of Conrad Mallett Sr. specifically from a couple different people. One of another one, and then sometimes I think about me, and I'm like, man, when people always say all these people, I feel like, man, some of the greatest people I've known have passed on. But some of the stories I would hear, and Dan Aldridge knows so much. He was telling me some of the stories. But the original stories came from Judge Claudia Markham.
Yes.
And she would tell me these stories about him because one of Conrad Mallett Jr.'s son, Mayo, is one of my best friends.
Is that right?
Yep.
Oh, man.
So,
Small world.
He was like, so as he was like, your friend's grandfather used to, Judge Markham, very graceful. She'd be like, your friend's grandfather was. And I'm like, he was doing all. I'm like, what's a black dude was doing all of this back in the.
Yeah, he was a bad dude. He was always, to me, very scholarly. And of course, I think he had a PhD at least. But a lot of people don't know. He ran the Department of Transportation for a while under Coleman. And people don't know that. He was the DDOT director at one point in time. Brilliant guy, though. Just an absolutely brilliant guy. He always carried himself, he was tall and he was proud and talked appropriate and proper and shit, man. He was just a great guy, and certainly goes down as one of the legends in Detroit. And so he got in, Coleman brought him in, had him, and he did a good job of running DDOT. And hell, he didn't know nothing about buses, but he knew how to manage people. And to get shit done. And, so Conrad gets his drive from his dad. But he was a great guy, man. There's no question about it.
Because I hear some of these stories about, the administrations and what he was facing and being one of those people that worked in different mayoral administrations.
That's right.
Understanding systems. Understanding people, how to connect to different neighborhoods. I'm like, man, how do you figure this out? And then it's and then I look at your story and think the same thing. How do you know all these people and systems? How do you get the productivity
and I
from
ran
someone?
10, 12 departments, so
that's
it's but that was my gift and my talent, and so I knew that my forte was able to run and manage large systems and organizations. That was my, whether it's designing cars at General Motors, or whether it's running parks and recreation in the city of Detroit. So I've been blessed to have the opportunity to do all of that, man, and it's been a good run.
And I can imagine you, I talk, sometimes I trip off of sometimes when young dudes come up to me and talk about stuff. But you're probably always you're at the grocery store and people are like, hey, man, you were the first person to...
Well, that's right. It was kind of funny. I went to a grocery store last week, after the Chronicle did that great story on me, and I thanked Hiram Jackson for that, because he did the whole page, and I don't know where the hell he found that full-length picture of me, but it was a great piece. It was well done, and so I'm going to buy a couple of the papers. So I go to the local supermarket, and I grab a couple of papers, and I'm putting them through, and the young brother at the cashier, he looked, and he said, "That's you, ain't it?"
Hilarious.
I said, "Yeah, that's me." He said, "Shit, you the man." He called the owner of the store. We said, "Man, we got a celebrity over here. Come on." And then he looked at me. He said, sometimes you got to tell these people who's who around here. I said, thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
Hilarious.
So, it's a funny story, man. But he was, I come in that store all the time, but he looked at that and he looked, because it was a small picture on the front advertising this. He said, man, that's you.
It's like now you have preferred access. Next time you go.
No, I still got to pay the same thing. My bologna I've been paying over there,
It's like, hey, you will not get this.
Wingdings.
You will not get this gum for free today, sir.
That's right.
So now that wraps up everything, and now I have my classic Detroit is different questions.
Yes.
But I do want you to come back. We gotta
anytime, man. This has been fun, man. I do this stuff all the time. Anytime. Just
okay.
Really. And now that I'm going to retire for September 1st, I got a little more time.
We may need to talk about the Charlie Beckham podcast on Detroit is different.
Before we got started here, and I know we got to end this up, I kind of texted my marketer, who's matter of fact, she said to tell you hello. It's Dana Harvey.
Oh, tell her what up. What up?
So she said, tell him. I said, I'm getting ready to do this podcast, because they didn't know I was going to do this.
Hilarious.
And I said, I'm over here now getting ready to do it. She's like, what? This is
hilarious.
Tell him I said hello.
And if we get you in the mix, because that was something Helen said too. As Helen loved my aunt,
yes,
love her to death. She was like, you need to ask him if he's interested. She's graceful too.
Yes,
like
she is.
All these women, like my mama, just graceful, but still know how to get things going. We will definitely have her in the mix on the production, because she, even more so than me, she'll say, all right now, Kari, we're going to rewrite this and edit. I'm like, they know what I meant.
Yeah, you can't say this.
They know what I meant. They know what I meant. Well, my heart is.
That's right.
But these classic questions, and I know this will be one. And
Yes,
actually, what's so funny is, other than the middle question, I wanted to ask almost because you hit everything in it. So I know this will be a colorful answer.
All right.
Detroit is different classic question first. What was your very first car? The year, make, and model, and what year did you get it?
1966 Corvair. It was green, and I got it in the summer of 1966.
Wow.
Loved that car.
Okay, where was the first place you went when you got it?
I was dating a lady that lived on the corner of Leslie and Homer, so I went around to her house.
Ain't that something?
To
Now,
show
did
it
she
to her.
know? Did she know you got the car? Or did you surprise her?
Yeah, she knew it, because I've been talking about Corvair all the time. So she knew it. So when I pulled up, she was, that Negro got that car.
Yeah, the first guy's first pickup of that first girl is a whole other experience. It's like you set your car out right.
Yeah, she and I had been going together for 3-4 years before then, so she
Taking
knew.
the bus.
Yeah, shit, man.
The bus date is a tough. The bus date is a tough date, because you look at every other guy with a car and you're thinking like, oh, he's about to get my girl.
That's right.
About to get my girl.
That's right. That car cost me $2,000. I paid $63 a month to GMAC in 1966.
Ain't that something? Now, what did your dad say when you got that? Because that's the other.
Well, he helped me get it. So,
okay, so he was supportive.
Yeah, he was supportive, and I was a pretty responsible kid back then, so he didn't mind doing that. But he was very supportive.
Okay.
I think he probably co-signed for it.
And he was like, you better keep your job.
Yeah, that's right.
The dad conversation is like, you better keep your job.
That's right.
I'm not about to end up.
Yeah, that's an easy question. You got to have something harder than that, man. That's easy.
Like riding by your friends at the bus stop, like,
Hey. Well, it's funny, so I'm going into that was at the end of my freshman year at University of Michigan, and a lot of people didn't have cars up there. None of us did first year. And so I was one of the first ones to have a car on campus. So I went back sophomore year, so I was, the man, because I had a car.
You were taking people everywhere.
Yes.
It was like, we don't want to go to the pizza place on campus no more.
That's right. You just
want to go to
ride in
Ypsilanti.
Charlie's car. That's right.
All right. Next question. If you're the DJ at the end of the Detroit fireworks, and you get to, you're at Woodward in Jefferson, you get to play 3 songs. What 3 songs are you playing?
Wow. At the end of the fireworks.
Yep. The grand finale just went off. And you can be, like I always tell people with this question, you can be one of those DJs that play what you want, or you could try to play to the crowd. It's all up to you.
Well, I'd play what I want, but I try to play stuff that when I played it, everybody, and it's mostly Detroiters that come down to that, would say and would recognize it. And so I would play My Girl, The Temptations.
Okay.
I would play Papa Was a Rolling Stone, Temptations. And then I'd play Hello Detroit by Sammy Davis Jr.
Ain't that something? Okay, in that order?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because I'd want them, because, you know, when you listen to the Hello Detroit, Sammy Davis Jr., by the way, that's going to be the song we lead in on my play.
I like it.
But when you play that, it's Sammy, and he does such a good job on it. Everybody recognizes it, and it's upbeat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want people leaving out of there being upbeat.
Mm.
But you start out with My Girl, because everybody knows that around the world as a Temptation Detroit song. Mm-hmm. So you start out with that, get people feeling kind of, yeah, my girl, and you're feeling good. Throw in a little Rolling Stone so people can get it. And then you send them home with Hello Detroit.
Okay. All right. And the last question. And I'll be surprised because you, obviously, somebody you work for is the general answer to this. But if you could rename Woodward after one Detroiter, who would it be and why?
Coleman Young.
Yeah, that's the most.
Now, we got a lot of stuff named after him. I mean, you already got the Coleman Young Municipal Center and Young Recreation Center and a whole lot of stuff, but he's the man. Mm. He laid the foundation for what Detroit is today, and you gotta pay homage to that.
And, okay, now I gotta ask. This is a off the book question.
All right.
On it. So, because local. And as I always say, like some of the confusion with local politics, and I hear this from my mom, graduated Central, and she tells me that there used to be a class in municipal government when she was in high school.
Yeah, civics. It was called civics class.
It was a local civics class.
You had to take civics.
And it had a textbook for local civics and everything.
Yes.
And the only person in the world of like kind of in the Coleman Young story too, another one of my big homies, and Dolores Bennett, rest in peace.
Oh,
she was the one person that gave me anything in the local city. Everything I've learned about local politics has been sort of hearsay, like just the clear ambition. And really, even when you learn about anything in the government, even up to the college, unless you go deeper into it, they teach you the Constitution and the three branches, but it's nothing really specific into like, okay, this is the function of what county does.
That's right.
This is what state does.
That's right.
This is what the city does. I remember I was sitting in one of the Mayor Kilpatrick talks, and one of those things, like orator, like Mayor Kilpatrick would be great with stuff. He was like, you know, some of this stuff is city roads, is state roads, and it's county roads.
Yep.
But when stuff goes wrong, y'all just look at it like it's a city thing.
That's right.
But it's a lot of, and I'm like, yeah, I guess you got to understand this stuff.
Yep.
And he's like, sometimes the city road can stop in the middle of the street, and then it turns over to a county road.
That's right.
Or a state road.
He's right.
And due to what's happening, we gotta, you know. And I was like, okay, all right, I understand that. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how do you even find out like the functionality of what it is? Because there's some people that, you know, can end up in office for forever, and people are like, what is this person supposed to do?
They ain't got a clue. That's right.
You know, so if a local civics book is needed, or like a local civics class, because so many people are just lost to like the combination of, you know, city, county, state,
yep, and feds,
and then even with city council, because this is such a very executive-led municipal government. Because every year I hear people, well, now every year is somebody running for city council, and then I hear all these people running for city council saying they're going to do this and that, and I'm like,
and they can't
as a
do
city
none
council
of
person, really, you're just
do none
supposed
of
to vote on a budget.
Can't do none of that.
And then it's like people I respect, and I pull them to the side and say, like, you realize when you get in office,
yeah, you can't do none of that.
You really need to learn how to budget, learn when the budget happens, and how
write ordinances. Their primary responsibility is to write ordinances, which is the Constitution that runs the city. They don't run it. They do ordinances and pass ordinances. Now, yeah, they ultimately pass the budget, but that's the only executive thing they do. Yeah. The executive branch does
almost everything in the city.
Stuff happen.
So, being that it's such a lost information, how do you feel the consciousness and the awareness can be raised? Because that local civics class doesn't exist, and it hasn't existed in years.
It doesn't. Well, again, it was in the Detroit Public Schools. I think you got to go back to DPS. It's called DPS CD now, but you got to go back to there and to that curriculum and put it back into the curriculum. It's just like they're now trying to put the arts and more cultural things back into the curriculum in the schools. They took them out because of money. Yeah. So I say there should be a civics class put back in that curriculum too, because that's where it was. And then you reach every kid that comes up. Well, hell, we got 50,000 students in DPS. We got close to 200,000 kids 18 and below. They need to see that and hear that and see that again. So just like we're putting art, music, etc. back in the classrooms and in the curriculum, put civics back in there too, because it just got taken out for one reason or another some years ago.
Well, I definitely think I like what you said, and I've been talking it too much. The way I started Detroit is Different was because people said I'm too much on a soapbox. But now that you've said that, I may lead an initiative to make this local text on local government.
I like that. Count me in.
And I may put you in the mix.
Count me in.
Because people don't
know. They haven't got a clue. And you can see them when they come down to city council, the things they talk about at council and to council and ask council to do. The people they vote for, they clearly don't understand the difference between the various bodies of government, and it affects their quality of life on a daily basis. So it's something every citizen should know. Yeah. It ought to be a requirement, quite frankly, that you've got to go through that so that you'll know.
That's what my mom told me. And like I say, other than Dolores used to love that lady to death.
Yeah, she was something else.
That's why
we named that park after her over there, man. She ran that neighborhood over there.
She carried around those pamphlets like, well, this is what they do. And I'm like, I ain't trying. You about to give me like 2 pounds of literature.
That's right. You didn't mess with Dolores Bennett, man. You didn't mess with Dolores Bennett.
Give me 2 pounds of literature about like, well, this is what they supposed to do, and this is how they. I was like, I never wanted to be on the county. They forced me into that. So this has been a great discussion.
This was
we'll
great,
definitely
man.
Get you back. This will come the week of the show. Talk a little bit about the show, where they can get tickets, which I'm sure I may be reaching out to Dana also for that information.
She probably gonna send you something. But
okay, I'm with you.
Opening night is September 15th at 8 o'clock at the Museum of African American History.
Okay.
We've got a website, Facebook, all of that. You can go on charliebeckham.com. charliebeckhamlive.com. You can go on Eventbrite. You can go on Facebook and put in "seemed like a good idea at the time." All of that will pop up, and tickets you can get through and online.
Okay, so the 15th.
15th
what
of
other
September.
nights?
Well, right now we just have the one night, but much to my chagrin, the tickets are going so fast that it looks like we're going to do more than one show, and so they're pushing me into another occupation, which is trying to be an actor, which I wasn't looking forward to, but people want to hear the story, and so the tickets are going fast. We're 2/3 of the way through the first act already.
That is phenomenal. I'm looking forward to this production myself.
Yeah,
I'll be jet setting
from
this Focus Hope event I got that same day over there.
Right.
So I'm going to be in effect, as I already know. My aunt's going to be like, we got to get there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. This was great. I look forward to doing it again.
Peace be.